My word. Seriously, what a frantic race weekend. There's just so much to talk about here on the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits to Podium today, and so we will do just that. Well, of course, we have to discuss the accident 3 years in the making and ask so many questions around it. We also have to discuss, well, is this genuinely a true Mercedes comeback for the rest of the season? Finally, we discuss more about the penalties. That's more on just the incident between Verstappen and Hamilton. But after that, there is so much in the midfield, so much to speak about Ferrari and Charles Leclerc. And we discuss, well, did Ferrari blow it or did they over-deliver? We also have the stats review by Sundaram returning for this race weekend. But as you can see on the title, the critical question that we are going to answer here, did Hamilton take things just a little bit too far? More on this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits to Podium. Let's begin. Well, hello there, folks. Welcome along to the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits to Podium for the British GP review. My name is Soumil Arora, joined as always by the former marketing head of the Force India F1 team in Kunal, Shah. And Kunal, seriously, I think what defines this particular race today was the fact that we had a revolutionary format change only a day ago and nobody's talking about that today. That's how impactful, that's how heavy, and that's how entertaining today's race was. Really, how much do you rate it today?
Well, the race was pretty exciting. Needless to sort of say that and state that in as many words. And obviously, it was made exciting by that opening lap crash that we saw. And I think, over the 52 odd laps that we had the race for, the crash between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton was a talking point, even though it didn't, sort of their battle didn't last more than 10 corners of the opening lap. So clearly that became the big talking point. It's going to be the talking point all the way through to even Hungary, I would say. In fact, it might be a talking point for several more years to come. It's going to be, how we look back at some of the Senna Prost moments and the Nigel Mansell and all these moments of the past. We're going to look back at this one and be like, oh my God, what actually happened there? And that's exactly what we are going to discuss right here today, Soumil, aren't we?
Absolutely. That's on the agenda. In a second, we will discuss more about the crash and everything. But clearly, the Manscaped lawnmower moment of the day has to unfortunately go to Max Verstappen. But let's actually stress upon this for 30 seconds. The reason why you hear everyone on every single podcast and every single F1 show in the world today say, oh, I'm so glad that Max Verstappen is out, you might be feeling, come on, don't be so vanilla. Say it, he's all right. Formula One is so safe now that it's not a big deal that people walk out. Guys, only a few years ago, we all know what's happened in the world of motorsport. Let's genuinely be grateful for a moment like this one, because the 51G impact is just quite something else. And Kunal, you've been watching the sport for far longer than I have. I think you started way back in the 90s. Can you imagine a 51G impact at that point?
I mean, it was incredible. Just the sheer speed at which the crash happened. It was pretty much the fastest corner of the circuit. It's taken almost flat out. They wouldn't have been flat out on the opening, lap of the race, given the fuel loads and so on. But definitely a really, really fast crash. The gravel didn't do much to slow the car down either, And to put it this way, Soumil, there is this clip doing the rounds of the internet, which, of course, Formula One did not broadcast for all the right reasons. An audio clip of Max Verstappen's immediately after the crash while he was in the cockpit. And, the team asked him, Max, are you okay? And he just mumbled, moaned. He, blurted out an expletive, mumbled, moaned. He actually didn't say much. And in itself actually said a lot about, how heavy the crash was. And in some ways, for me at least, it was a peep into the darker side of the sport that we actually don't like to see. Max, for all that aggression, for all that nothing can beat me attitude, sounded all beaten, bruised. And we're glad that Max walked away, like he wrote about as well on his social media. But that was definitely a scary crash. And we had like a 35-40 minute break just because, his car was devastated and then the barriers needed repair and so on.
Devastated is the right word for that car. I was watching the race with a friend of mine. We were shocked and It felt like a person had died when you saw that car. It was that badly bruised. It's just a human thing. You just wasn't a sight you wanted to watch. But before we get to analysing the incident and the penalties and more on that one, the key question that we're trying to answer today, Kunal, is did Hamilton get carried away? And Verstappen clearly think he did, because from his social media post he said that he was disrespectful in celebration. Now, to put the facts clear, Hamilton did ask about Verstappen during the red flag, and Hamilton wasn't apparently told about his condition until after his celebrations were done. But still, carried away doesn't just mean in terms of his celebrations, but also in terms of the move that he made at turn number one. That's a lovely point that he mentioned before we started recording today.
Yeah, I mean, that just revolves around this whole conversation. Was there a need for a penalty? And, if there was a need for a penalty, was it a lenient penalty or was it a harsh penalty and so on? And, I, I'm still not fully clear because I guess even the FI is not clear. And after a point, they just have to make a decision. And then, their decision is also influenced by a lot of historical decisions they've made, like we saw even in the race in Austria. So to me, I wish they would have passed it off as a racing incident. They've said they are a little more lenient on the opening lap of the race and so on. But I guess that, of course, didn't happen. In which case, they, of course, said that Lewis was guilty. And I think if he was found guilty, maybe a 10-second time penalty was a little too lenient. Maybe I would have expected a 10-second stop and go penalty. And, the most, how do I say, the heaviest in race penalty is what I would put it. And why are we talking about this? Because, various replays, various former drivers, and again, depending on which former driver's commentary and viewpoint you would actually like as a viewer, you are bound to take sides. And Karun Chandok, of course, was on one side. We had Damon Hill and Jenson Button on the other side, and the likes. And to me, it seemed that Lewis knew at the back of his head, I need to get Max on the opening lap of the race, right? And pulling off something special in front of the British fans, giving something back to them for all the passion they share with him, was probably what carried him away a fair bit, I would say. Right? And that's where I would say his carried away status falls in how I would think as well. Honestly, I don't care about how he celebrates and what he celebrates as. That's all, that's all the showmanship, which I'm not sort of interested in.
Seriously, though, the fact is clear. We will discuss more on what if Verstappen was in the race and more about Mercedes' comeback in a minute or two. But the fact is clear. That was some remarkable drive. Penalty or not, penalty was there. Hamilton came back superbly. But the alarming fact is, even with that 10-second penalty, it wasn't shocking that Lewis won. Deep down in our mind, we all knew that he was eventually going to. That's the gulf that Verstappen and Hamilton have built up to all the others. Perez obviously having a very terrible race, and the same can be said for Bottas, all things considered. So just have to salute how on top of their game both these drivers are. But more on that accident in a second. More about this one. And honestly, Kunal, it feels a lot like those old romantic books of sorts that the authors write, where you have two lovers and they finally, after years, eventually end up making that special contact. And there's passion, there is excitement, there's drama, except in this case, there's no love. And this battle finally seems to have gotten the gloves out. Gone is the goody old PR robot that Verstappen used to be, and all drivers used to be for that matter. The comments are raw, and that is when you know that it's hit a nerve. This is genuinely turning up to be an amazing battle, probably. They've just turned that switch on right now, and that's what I love to see, finally.
Yeah, they have. And, we saw Christian Horner, Helmut Marko. We saw both of them saying Hamilton deserves a far more stricter penalty for what he did. And it seems like that, and there are two points to this, right? The reason why we all think the penalty wasn't sufficient, right? And I'm saying this could be one of the reasons, right? Is because of the outcome of the crash. It just put Verstappen in the wall, out of the race, and, completely down to 0 points in the tally, right? So that was one thing. And the second was the ease with which, what do you say, the ease with which Lewis could even come back and claim the win.
Yeah.
And frankly, I'll also put it this way, that Lewis actually drove a wonderful race to win, just that maybe it seemed hollow to a lot of people because of the crash and the nature of that crash, right?
Yeah.
And that said, I'm also going to talk about how I see Max Verstappen's view as well. Was Max a little too aggressive? And is this what he should expect if he keeps throwing such aggression at Lewis? On the opening laps, should he be the only one, having a carefree driving attitude, and should Lewis be the one sort of holding back because of all his experience and those talks that we have? And in my view, and this is my reading of the weekend, the Parc Fermé rules, and Soumil, you and I touched upon this yesterday in the sprint review as well. The Parc Fermé rules is what Verstappen spoke about after the F1 sprint. And then he said, Mercedes are the fastest, we are the slowest, but there's nothing we can do about this. And maybe this was at the back of Max's mind as well on the opening lap, that if Lewis made the move, took the lead, he probably did not have the straight line speed advantage to get the position back on track. And that's probably what triggered Max Verstappen into making the aggressive move that he did as well. And that's what Karun Chandok spoke about, that Max turned in extremely aggressively. So a lot that goes, between both the drivers and how they would view this situation. And just to add to your romantic story, Soumil, if I may, and that's your thought, right? It's wonderful, I say. This is not the last time Max and Lewis are going to be in this situation. And what I am waiting to see is if either of them change how they behave in a wheel-to-wheel battle after this situation, because they're going to be racing together for the seasons to come, and hopefully they're going to be battling together because both their teams give them cars worthy enough to take to a battle with the other.
50 Shades of Grey area in the terms of Soviet's ruling in this case. Bahrain was grey. This is even greyer in this case, if you want to put it that way. I mean, one wonders what's going to happen later on this season. Fireworks it is going to be between Hamilton and Verstappen all the way through. And you're absolutely right. In the sprint qualifying as well, we saw what happened. One driver took the lead in the start and eventually ended up dominating. And that was the thing. F1, we've often discussed, is it just a lap one sport? It's not, to be honest. But really, that was a bit crazy. But let's get back on that thought, Kunal, about Verstappen's race and about Hamilton's win. Had Verstappen been there, it's sort of hard to imagine. But then again, that's the same point we discussed. He wasn't. So Hamilton was clear down the line to end up taking this big win. Really, though, it raises so many questions about Mercedes' comeback. And of course, the next question that we have to discuss on this part is this a genuine Mercedes comeback on the way? The upgrades were there. We definitely saw a rise in pace. But would you sort of account this to the Parc Fermé rules changing and Mercedes having locked in that sort of high straight line setup? Or is this more of a genuine parts-based comeback that they've got with the new upgrade coming in?
For We Are Sport, when we interviewed Lewis Hamilton post-race, he actually said that we have made a step forward, but Red Bull is still the quicker car. And, guys, the step forward the difference is actually 2/10 or 2.5 tenths, not even 3 tenths, right? So the fact is that it seemed after a lot of races that Lewis and Mercedes were able to take the battle to Max and Red Bull with far more ease than the previous few races. So in my view, their step forward seems far more genuine now this time. And that whole exciting upgrades thing has actually worked in the case of Lewis Hamilton. And that to me was actually, it's great to know, because this is the kind of momentum that they needed to break for Red Bull. Of course, not in this way. For anyone thinking that Lewis did this on purpose, you would definitely be surprised to know that it could have very well been Lewis out of the race, because it's a high stakes game, right? It could have been both drivers out. It could have been a far harsher penalty. So no driver has, of course, done this on purpose, right? But yes, I think Mercedes's, upgrades have delivered a little bit of more extra performance to make the title battle only that much more interesting, Soumil.
All things considered, though, Hamilton win number 99. He's a lot closer to Max in the championship standings. But there's an alarming stat that I read somewhere on Twitter before recording this video, and it was that Max has not finished a race lower than second in this season, which is why that even though he's had two mega high-profile DNFs in Baku and here at Silverstone, that's what it is. He's still the championship leader. Goes to show that this man has really evolved quite a fair bit over the years, to be honest.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Max has done a fair bit, I would say. And imagine that he's always finished on the podium if he's finished a race.
Yeah.
And Soumil, I have an interesting question for you,
Okay.
right? Would the reactions, and you're a commentator as well, you've commentated on several motorsport races. Would the reactions have been any different had Max Verstappen done this to Lewis Hamilton?
You've hit it right. You've hit a right nerve there. It's got me wondering. To be honest, yes, it makes a huge impact. Sort of put it this way: if Danny Kvyat was the one making the accident, and suppose this was say 2016, of course people would get back down on him because of the history that Kvyat would have had at that point of time. Same with Max. There's this sort of reputation that Max brings in that, oh, he's hot-headed. Even though he's evolved, he still brings that raw, karting-like aggression to him. So I think genuinely, yes. And even if the place was different, what if this had happened at Zandvoort and Max would have been the one doing it? Think about that. Bit crazy, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, the fan power, always comes into play out here as well. And,
Yeah.
Maybe all the commentators we listen to, and a lot of them that we listen to in English are British, right? And
be.
those are where all the human biases come in as well, right? And
Only normal.
there are actually several biases that come in because crashes happen a lot of times because of driver error.
Yeah.
And then even the stewarding that goes into judging these crashes can bring in a lot of these biases as well. I'm not going to explain that point any further. I'm assuming you guys have understood where I'm trying to go. But, this just sets up a far more exciting title battle.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunate, but, Max's lead has been cut down to, I think, 7 points. Red Bull Racing's lead is down to 4 points. And now all eyes on Hungary and, what each team's packages and drivers are able to deliver out there. And
Yeah.
since we're talking about Red Bull and their lead, the one thing that would have hurt Red Bull even more so, Soumil, was that Checo Perez could take just 1 point away from Lewis Hamilton and not 25 more points. What they actually want, despite all the love and all the consistency that Checo Perez is able to bring, what they actually want is if Max doesn't win, Checo takes the win, like he did that in Baku, right? But Checo just had one of his worst weekends that I can remember. In fact, this is what I'm going to quiz Sundaram into, saying at some point. When was the last time Checo Perez had such a bad Grand Prix weekend? And in my view, he's made 2 driver errors in the last 2 Grand Prix weekends, in Austria and in Silverstone.
That's
and
right.
that is very, very uncharacteristic of him.
Yeah, and Sundaram's got a very good point on the last time last time the Red Bull teams not a single Red Bull car was on the podium is what I meant to say. It's a long, long while ago. But more on that stuff in the second part. We're going to be back in a second. Stay right here. A lot more stuff, including discussing the lobbying, including discussing Sundaram's stats review, and of course Ferrari in the second part. Stay right here on the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits to Podium.